Hi, Year 11, this is Miss Curzons. I'm just about to record a revision lecture for you on the character of Lady Macbeth. First, I want to recap what's on the assessment just very quickly so that you know what you're supposed to be revising. The question is going to be just one question on the whole play, and it will focus on a character. So it'll be asking you to look at how a character is presented across the whole play and what their role is in the play as well. Emphasis there on the word whole play. You're not just looking at one scene, you're not just looking at one act, you're looking at how that character is presented and how they develop from the beginning to the middle to the end of the whole play. If you were to just look at one act, you would be significantly limiting the number of marks available to you. As well as looking at how they're presented, so looking at words like evil, manipulative, etc., you also need to be looking at what their role is in the play. Why has Shakespeare included them? What is their purpose? Are they a catalyst for his downfall? Do they bring about his hamartia, ambition? Are they a foil to him? Do they show the road that he should have taken but failed to take, like Banquo does? You really need to be considering their purpose as well as how they are presented. This is really important to note, Year 11. Whilst you are going to be given some quotations, that quotation bank is going to be very limited. And by limited, I mean literally about 5 or 6 quotations for each character. That is not enough to form a whole essay, which means that you still need to be revising quotations at home and making sure that your understanding of every character is very, very clear and detailed, so that you can bring in your own knowledge as well as using that quotation bank. And then finally, just because this question is on one character, that doesn't mean that you only think about that character. You should also be thinking about how they relate to other key themes like the supernatural or ambition or duplicity, and also how they impact on the other characters in the play, how they interact with others. Do they affect the behaviour of other characters? Are they significant in bringing about certain decisions or choices in the play? To get the top marks, you need to not just look at your character, but also how they impact on the play as a whole and the other characters within it. Just some key tips on writing an introduction, because I know that this is something that a lot of you struggle with. First of all, you have to have a clear line of argument. That is the purpose of an introduction. You are introducing to your reader, this is what my argument is about this character. Therefore, saying something vague like Lady Macbeth is an important character in the play, that's not good enough. You're not telling me how she is presented, what kind of character she is, what role she plays. You're just telling me that she's important. Well, I already knew that. I already knew that because we wouldn't be asking you a question on her if she wasn't important. So avoid vague statements like that. Instead, say something like Lady Macbeth is presented as a determined, manipulative character who plays a key role in bringing about the eventual downfall of herself and her husband. That way, you're looking at how she's presented and also what her purpose is in the play. This is a trap that a lot of you fall into. You do not need quotations or analysis in your introduction. That is not the point of an introduction. So phrases like this is shown when, or for example in Act 1, you don't need those. That's why it's in red. I don't want to see that in your first paragraph. Your first paragraph is simply setting up a line of argument, which you then back up in the rest of your essay. And finally, you need to examine how the character changes or develops across the whole play. So your line of argument should not just be talking about how they're presented at the beginning, but should consider how they develop. So, for example, Lady Macbeth is a heartless and evil character. Yes, that might be true at the beginning of the play, but actually she does show some change, some transformation as the play progresses, and you need to show awareness of that from the beginning. So instead, you might want to say something like, as the plot progresses, Lady Macbeth transforms from an overbearing, dominant wife to a haunted, delusional woman who cannot escape her own guilt. That way, you're covering the whole play, not just one aspect of it. Okay, now I'm going to talk you through some key quotations and why they are important to Lady Macbeth's character development. So in Act 1, I'm going to take you through chronologically, which is what you should be doing in your essay. Don't jump around. Look at the character at the beginning and then track through all the way to the end. At the top right there, you've got some key adjectives that you might use to describe her character at this stage in the play. And then underneath, you've got several key quotations, which I'm about to talk you through. So the first one there, glums thou art, and cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Hopefully you remember Year 11 that this comes from Lady Macbeth's first monologue, after she has read Macbeth's letter that tells her about the prophecies and about the fact that he is predicted to become king. Now, after reading that letter, her ambition is ignited. She wants it. She wants to become queen, and she wants her husband to be king. And so here she's saying, Glamis thou art. You've already got the title of Thane of Glamis. You've now been given the title of Thane of Cawdor for your bravery in the war. And shalt be what thou art promised, meaning you will be king. I'll make sure that that prophecy comes true. Now, this is important because in listing his titles here, Glamis, Cawdor, King, she is actually echoing the witches. She is mimicking their prophecies. Therefore, she is being made to seem witch-like. She's being aligned with the supernatural. And therefore, from her very first appearance, we are aware that she is an evil character, that she is a character that we are suspicious of, that we are wary of. Okay, so she's being aligned with the supernatural, but also she's using this verb shalt be, not you might be or you could be, but you will be what you're promised, meaning that she has no doubt in her mind that he will become king, that she will make it happen. She is determined. She is resolute. These are the key words you need to be using for her character at this stage. She will not take no for an answer, essentially. Now, as part of that same speech, she says, hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear. Now, this is her kind of talking to her husband, although he isn't actually on stage. She's sort of speaking to him from a distance. Hie thee hither means come here. She is commanding him. She is conjuring him. She's saying, come here. She's using an imperative there with that word hie to say, I want you to come here now so that I can persuade you to do what you need to do to become king. So this use of an imperative demonstrates that she is the dominant one in the relationship. She is commanding him, not the other way round. She has the power and the authority within their marriage, and that is important too. That I may pour my spirits in thine ear. That verb pour, we automatically associate with a liquid or a potion or a poison even. So the fact that she's using that verb and this kind of imagery of her pouring a liquid into his ear, she is basically using a metaphor to describe her words, her speech and her persuasion as a potion. So she herself is aligning herself with the witches here. She is saying, I'm almost casting a spell on him, and I have the ability to do that. So again, there's this idea of her being aligned with evil and the supernatural. And that word spirit, obviously, is directly associated with ghosts and other supernatural creatures. So you've got this idea of her being dominant, and you've got this idea of her being evil and witch-like. When Macbeth then appears, when he finally gets back to the castle, they have a conversation about what they're going to do. And Lady Macbeth's advice to her husband is to look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Now, this is a very key quotation. This is one that you absolutely must know for the assessment, Year 11. Here, she is basically saying, you need to appear to be loyal to Duncan. You need to appear to be the perfect subject, but in reality, you are plotting against him. So she's encouraging him to be deceptive, to be duplicitous, which means two-faced. And that verb look like the innocent flower kind of emphasizes that idea of appearing one way, but actually being another, appearance versus reality here, which shows just how kind of manipulative and how deceptive she is as a character, that she's willing to deceive the king himself, who has actually done great things for them, who's actually rewarded them and been a very fair king. But that doesn't bother her at all. She's still willing to deceive him. This reference to a serpent is also significant because we automatically associate a serpent with the devil, and in particular, the story of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. And in this scene, you've got a female persuading a male to do something evil, just like in the Garden of Eden, Eve persuaded Adam to take a bite out of the apple, the tree of knowledge. So there's a parallel here. You've got Lady Macbeth being associated with Eve, and therefore being associated with the original sin, which brought all sin into the earth, into human life. So it's kind of heightening our awareness of her evil nature by associating her with the original sin and with the devil in the form of the serpent. So just be aware of those biblical references there that are once again reminding us that she is a character to be suspected and not to be trusted. Now, when they are then discussing their plot later on, once the king has arrived, and Macbeth is having doubts, he's thinking, actually, I've changed my mind. I don't want to go ahead with this plan. And he voices those doubts to his wife. She is entirely unsympathetic. And she says to him, when you durst do it, then you were a man. She's essentially saying, unless you do this, unless you dare to do this, unless you have the courage and the bravery to go ahead with what you promised, then you're not a man. She's using the technique of emasculation to manipulate her husband. And this shows just how kind of devious and clever she is, that she knows exactly which buttons to press to get her husband to do what she wants. And by the end of this conversation, he's been persuaded. She is successful. So this clever use of emasculation here is designed to manipulate and persuade him, and it succeeds. And that final one there is another technique she uses to persuade him, which is where she talks about how if she'd promised to do something for him, if she'd promised to kill a baby, for example, she would have done it without hesitation. She says, I would have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out. She's saying, if I'd promised to kill a child, I would have had no hesitation in doing that thing, even if I was breastfeeding that baby at the time. I would have plucked it from my breast. I would have taken it from my body whilst breastfeeding it and smashed its head and killed it. So she's trying to demonstrate here just how kind of loyal she is to Macbeth, in that she would do anything if she had promised to do so. But meanwhile, she's also revealing a lot about her character. She is using verbs like plucked and dashed, which are kind of violent, harsh verbs, which directly contrast with this image of this kind of innocent, vulnerable baby, this boneless gums. He doesn't even have any teeth yet. That's how young he is and how innocent this baby is. And yet she's treating it with extreme aggression and violence, which again reiterates just how evil she is and how compassionless she is, that as a woman, she's willing to kill a baby. She's transformed this image that is automatically about nurturing and affection and love to something incredibly violent and aggressive. So you might want to think about that juxtaposition and what that shows about her character here. Let's move on to Act 2 then. In Act 2, they actually go ahead with the murder. Hopefully you remember that. And we actually get a glimpse of perhaps some kind of weakness from Lady Macbeth at the beginning of this scene. She says, had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. Meaning, the reason I couldn't do it myself was because he looked like my father, which is a surprising show of compassion, a surprising show of love. The fact that she, if somebody looks like her father, she couldn't possibly hurt them. So we might be seeing a glimpse here of the Lady Macbeth that resides beneath this callous surface. The Lady Macbeth that actually does have thoughts and feelings and can be humane. But then, as soon as Macbeth arrives on the scene, she disregards that kind of aspect of her, and she becomes much more domineering once again. And when Macbeth is expressing his guilt, he's saying, I wish I hadn't done it, I'm never going to wash this blood off my hands. She says, well, my hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. She is embarrassed by him. She's embarrassed by his regret. She's embarrassed by his show of compassion and human feelings, she thinks that's something to be ashamed of. She uses that word white to imply that he's being cowardly. She's saying that, in regretting what you've done, you've shown cowardice. So again, she's now got reverted back to that kind of callous, determined, resolute character who will not accept any weakness from herself or her husband. She also claims that a little water clears us of this deed. She's saying that, we can wash this deed off our hands. We can kind of remove the guilt from ourselves with just a little water, not even a lot. So she's minimizing what they've done, suggesting that it wasn't that big a deal, actually. And she's referring to the murder as a deed, as if, it's just another action that they've done. She isn't actually calling it by its name of murder, perhaps to kind of, again, minimize it, make it seem like less of an important thing, and to kind of reassure her husband that they haven't actually done anything wrong. So she seems to think that they can completely wash themselves free of guilt just by washing their hands and washing off the blood, which is the complete contrast to Macbeth, who thinks that all of great Neptune's oceans will never wash this blood from my hands. And you might want to think about, again, the juxtaposition there between how guilty he feels versus how remorseless she acts here. She does not regret it at all. Once Duncan's body has then been discovered by Macduff, and Lady Macbeth obviously acts as if she had no idea that this had happened and is completely in shock, he says, "Oh, gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak." Macduff has been fooled by her facade. Her manipulation, her deception is so successful that people think she's gentle, that people think that she is harmless and that she's a weak woman. And this shows how she is underestimated by the rest of the characters in the play, purely because of her sex. And that makes her all the more dangerous because she's able to do things without people expecting it. So it shows just how successful her deception has been, and it also illustrates how dangerous she is because she's underestimated. In Act 3, then, this is where we see a change taking place in Lady Macbeth. She becomes uneasy. She's not quite secure. She doesn't feel as determined and as certain and as doubtless as she was before. She says, "Naught's had, all spent when our desire is got without content." She's saying, okay, we've got our titles of king and queen, but we're not actually happy. And that is really important to note, that she is perhaps realizing the error of her ways because they haven't found that sense of security that she was expecting them to find. So perhaps at this stage, she's becoming much more doubtful and uneasy in what they have done. You'll also notice that there is a role reversal going on between her and her husband here. He is plotting to kill Banquo, but he hasn't told her about that. He keeps that from her. And he actually says to her, when she asks what's going on, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck." So she's gone from being kind of the main driver in Duncan's murder to being innocent, to being oblivious, to not being party to the knowledge of what they're going to do next. And he's even infantilizing her here. Dearest Chuck means he's talking about her as if she's a baby chick, as if she's a child. So, what he's almost doing to her what she did to him when she treated him like he wasn't a man. He's diminishing her, making her feel like a child. And so she's gone from being the dominant one to being the passive one who isn't in control, who isn't making the decisions, and who is actually very unaware of what's going on. And you also notice that in the banquet scene at the very beginning, when Macbeth is welcoming all the guests, and she says, "Pronounce it for me, sir, to all our friends." She's saying, you say welcome on my behalf, which suggests that, she isn't speaking for herself anymore. He is doing it for her. He is taking the front seat and she is taking a step back. So once again, this illustrates their role reversal and the fact that he has become more dominant and she is becoming much more submissive here. Now, you'll notice that my next slide is Act 5, which means I have skipped Act 4. And the reason for that is that she does not actually appear. Lady Macbeth's character is not on stage at all in Act 4. She is absent during that period. And we realise why that is during Act 5 when we find out that she's been sleepwalking and gradually becoming increasingly mad and delusional, and she's been hallucinating things. And so she hasn't been on stage because she's just been in her own thoughts, gradually being driven mad by her own guilt. And in fact, these two quotations are taken from where she is sleepwalking. She says, "Who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him?" She's still reflecting on what they did to Duncan. All this time later, she's still thinking about it. And you'll notice from the graphic nature of this imagery, so much blood, that it's traumatized her, it's haunted her. She can still picture it very clearly in her mind. And so whilst we originally thought that she showed no remorse, no guilt at all, no regret, actually it has been haunting her, it has been playing on her mind to the point where now she can't even sleep without having nightmares about it. So that very graphic imagery of the blood kind of highlights how much it's been haunting her. She also says something very significant, which I think is a direct contrast to how she was presented in Act 2. She says, "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." Little hand. You know, she's diminishing herself. She's viewing herself as being almost childlike, almost innocent. So from being the kind of driving force, the domineering wife in Act 1, who kind of forced Macbeth into committing murder, now she's viewing herself as a little hand, somebody who's poor and innocent and kind of blameless here. The fact that she's saying all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this hand almost directly juxtaposes with what she said earlier about a little water clearing us of this deed. She's saying, I can never wash clean the smell of the blood. That bitterness, the bitterness of that blood on my hands will haunt me forevermore, and I will never rid myself of that guilt. So in actuality, whilst we originally thought that she showed no remorse and no guilt whatsoever, it appears that she was just burying it, that she was just concealing it. And now that she's asleep, those guilty feelings bubble up to the surface and are being exposed to the audience. So you can see how she has progressed from a character who was very much powerful, dominant, manipulative, persuasive, witch-like, to a character that's almost childlike, is almost helpless, and who's being completely overtaken by her guilt. And that's the sort of line of argument that you need to follow in an essay on her character. Look at how she develops, look at how she changes, and also look at how significant her role was in Act 1 in bringing about the events of the rest of the play. Because if she hadn't been there to persuade Macbeth to kill Duncan in the first place, perhaps the rest of the events of the play would have been very different. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Year 11. I think I've rambled on for a bit too long. I hope that was helpful, and good luck with your exams.